Yeah, there you go.
Great. So we'll give another minute or two to let some more participants join, if that's okay with you, David, and then we'll jump right into
Sure.
it. So if you have already joined us, please feel free to add your name and where you're dialing in from in the chat so we can follow up with you later and see how much of the world we can connect with today.
Somebody from Nigeria.
All right, we got California
Yeah,
and Maryland so far. Great.
yeah.
Again, welcome to everyone. I want to welcome you to the Book Buzz webinar sponsored by International Leadership Association. And I have the pleasure tonight to welcome Mr. David Knapp. And he's going to be discussing his great book called Marathon Leadership 26.2, The Essential Lessons for Modern Leaders. And we'll give you a little bit of background on David. So David, he's the president of Marathon Leadership in Thornton, Colorado, which specializes in leadership and organizational development. With over 30 years of experience in the corporate boardroom and the university classroom, Dr. Knapp's passion is helping clients improve their communication and leadership skills through the practice application of the most current research findings in those areas. Dr. Knapp's diverse professional career, which includes stints as the manager of North American Learning and Development for an international IT consulting firm, a college professor, a certified personal trainer, and a running coach. Wow, that's a mouthful, David. You stay pretty busy, I can tell. And a professional actor. It gives him a broad range of experiences from which to draw. His educational background also is varied and includes an MA in Performing Arts from Emerson College in Boston and a PhD in Human Communication Studies from the University of Denver. And as an executive coach, trainer, and consultant, Dr. Knapp has worked with a number of Fortune 500 companies, including many that you all know: Apple, Bank of America, IBM, Home Depot, just to name a few. He's also supported countless city, county, and state governments, as well as numerous federal agencies, including the CDC, EPA, U.S. Patent Office, and others. And finally, Dr. Knapp remains a competitive age group athlete. And I just learned he likes to train at altitude so he can race at low altitude. Pretty smart strategy. And he's completed over 100 full marathons and countless other running events, including triathlons up to the half marathon distance, so Ironman distance. So that's quite some accomplishments, David, and welcome this evening.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for having me, and thanks for joining.
Great. So we want to jump right into your book, David, and I got a few questions to ask you. So being a marathon runner myself, I haven't quite run 100 marathons. I've done 52, and I didn't even want to run those 52, but you know how that is.
Yeah.
And so in the book's introduction, you talk about the connection between training for and completing marathons and leadership. Can you share a tale with the participants on a day's webinar about that?
Yeah, sure. So, actually, I ran my first marathon back in 2000, and I did the original from Marathon to Athens, Greece, which was spectacular. It was very magical to finish in Olympic Stadium in Athens. But the story of the book really comes from a quite miserable training run I was having one day, and you can probably relate to this, Barrett. But it was a cold, rainy day in Colorado, which is actually kind of unusual, and I was training hard for a race. I was hoping to run a good race. So skipping my long run that day was not an option, but didn't really feel it that day. And so to kind of pass the time, I started thinking about everything that I had learned from training for and running marathons and how that kind of related into my professional work of coaching and training leaders. And as I kind of noodled on that during the run, I realized there was a lot of crossover. So as soon as I finished my run, got into some dry clothes and went into my office and I started recording what I thought about. And I originally had about 12 ideas that came to me. And over the years, I just kept adding to it as more and more crossover, struck and this metaphor of being a marathon leader. And eventually I got close to that magical number of 26, because for those of you who are not runners, 26.2 miles in a marathon. And so I started writing it and led to the book and started to incorporate it into my coaching as well. So that's where it came from.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Dave. Now that's an interesting segue, as you mentioned that there's 26.2 miles in the marathon. I know you said you ran the original Athens to Greece route. Did you run the actual 26, or did you run the distance of the original marathon?
It's a great question. They've set up the course to be now a modern marathon, which is 26.2 miles. Actually, from Marathon to Athens, it's under that. It's a little bit closer to 25 miles, and it also kind of ties in. One of the main things that I try and get across. It says 26.2 lessons for modern leaders. I do believe that the main point to leadership is being a servant leader. And I'll talk a little bit more about it. But for those of you who are just curious, because even if you're not a runner, and by the way, please don't let the book intimidate you or the fact that they found a moderator in Barrett who has also run a lot. The book is designed for non-runners, for folks who don't even like to drive 26 miles, let alone run 26 miles. It's really just a metaphor for becoming a leader. And a large part of that is, hey, what's the point to leadership? And I'm a big believer in servant leadership. Greenleaf's great model of leadership. And if you don't like the word servant, what I tell my clients and my coachees is call it service leadership, right? And it's all about serving others. That's the point to it. But just as a quick side note, anecdote, great for Trivial Pursuit, or if you're ever on Jeopardy, to Barrett's point, until 1908, marathons were a nice, tidy 25 miles. And at the 1908 Olympics in London, the royal family wanted to start the race at the Whitehall Castle and run it through to London. And then once you got into the stadium, they wanted the runners to run and finish in front of the royal box. So they suggested, in quotations, that the course be extended, and it was. And nobody really knows from that point on, but why the English marathon became the distance, but it did. And so we have this unusual 26.2. So I kind of talk about that in the book, but because all marathons have that point too, I think leaders have that point to it as well. And that really is what we should be striving for, even though unfortunately in today's world, so many business and political leaders are not service first leaders. They are power first leaders. And in my own little way, what I try and do is combat that by really talking about the point to leadership being service to others.
That's a great concept, and I definitely concur with being a servant leader.
Yeah.
It's really all about that. Now, going back to the book, in lesson 6, you kind of talk about some of the challenges of being a leader. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those challenges are?
Yeah, absolutely. And lesson 6 is all about, look, if this were easy, everybody could do it and it wouldn't mean as much, right? So if everybody could run a marathon really easily, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Same thing with being a great leader. If it were easy to be a great leader, everyone would be one, and people like myself would be out of business. And frankly, I'd be okay with that because I think the world would be in a better place. But I talk about some of the challenges that I've heard in my 30 plus years of working with leaders all over the world, and some of the challenges that they face. One of the big ones that strikes, and it goes back to servant leadership, is having to kind of be in charge of your own ego, right? Being a leader, we have a tendency to get a little bit of ego in there, and being a good servant leader means that you have to recognize that A, you don't have to have all the answers, and B, people may have better answers than you on your staff, and it's about promoting the ideas over your own ego. I also talk a little bit about human beings are challenging, right? I mean, I have a lot of technical and scientific individuals that I work with, a lot of clients and a lot of executives, and they all talk about, hey, at times it's just so much easier to focus on my work or to solve that problem or set up that experiment than it is to deal with people because people can be challenging. And then I think one of the big things that I hear is kind of a combination of two things that I talk about in the book, that a lot of times leaders are given the accountability for success, but maybe not really the true power to get things done, right? Or I'm being held responsible or accountable for this, but I can't make this happen. And I think especially in cross-functional matrixed environments, I hear that a lot. And then I think one of the other big ones that I hear is, well, of course, time is a big one too. We're all rushed. We don't have the resources, the time to do things. But I think going back to kind of an athletic metaphor that I heard from one leader one time, a lot of it goes back to people are put in these leadership positions and they're really not set up for success. And frankly, in some cases, set up for failure. And so they're promoted, they're saying, hey, congratulations, you're a leader, but they're not really given the training or the support, whether it's a mentor or a coach, to be a good leader. I had one gentleman in a course I was teaching, and they said, you've heard the expression you get thrown in the water and it's sink or swim. And he said, I feel in my position, I was thrown into the water and told to get an Olympic medal in swimming. So forget just swimming, I had to perform. And I hear that a lot from individuals. And so that's, I think, a big challenge. Along with the pace, certainly since the pandemic, things have just speeded up and it's not getting any slower.
Yeah, yeah, you're right, and there's definitely not a lot of grace to get results in
Yeah.
today's climate. So
Yeah.
again, you talk about the importance of setting goals and being flexible as an agile as a leader, but also, when you're running a marathon and when you're being a leader in whatever capacity, especially this being the new year, we just turned into 2026, so a lot of people are doing resolutions and setting goals. How do you correspond the goal setting with all of the alone time that you have to take being a leader and being a marathon runner? How do you balance those two?
Yeah, it can be difficult. And I in the book, I talk a lot about the importance of, having a kind of regimented goal planning, whether it's SMART goals, which I talk about, or Adam Creek, the Olympic athlete from Canada, who was gracious enough to let me share some of his information in the book, created clear goals. Again, an acronym. The C stands for collaborative, and then obviously in the book, I go through each of them. But I think it's important to start from that goal and have clearly defined goals, but also recognize as a leader that at times you're going to have to adjust from those goals, right? And there are going to be things that come up that will make you kind of deviate from that. But it's important that you have those from the beginning, and then that you also recognize that, being a marathoner can be a very lonely sport, right? It's not like a team sport. And yet, being a leader is all about leading others. And actually, in a separate chapter in the book, I talk about the importance of thanking people along the way and all of those individuals who have supported you in your marathon quest. So, it is important to kind of find that balance between, yes, the focus on developing yourself through goals, but also the importance of setting those goals for your teams, your department, your organization as a whole, and recognizing also that there are times when you need to be the leader and out front, and then at other times when you need to allow others to lead in true servant leadership fashion.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Again, for myself, I'm often asked, what am I thinking about when I'm running? And I think about the same thing when I'm leading. I'm always thinking about the next step. What
Yes.
what happens then.
Yeah.
And so segueing from that, in the book, you kind of give an acronym which I really like, RAN, and you call that the model of performance. Can you explain to us what you mean by that?
Sure. The RAND model of performance is really one of my foundational points that I come back to in a lot, whether I'm training or coaching accountability or performance management. And it comes from the wonderful tradition of contingency theory in leadership, whether it's Blanchard and Hersey's situational leadership model or Vroom's great model on contingency. But RAND stands for roles addressing needs. And basically, it gets to the heart that a good leader recognizes that they have to be adjustable or adaptable and respond in the role that their individuals, their team, their department, maybe even their entire organization needs. And just at the 30,000 foot level, I talk about identifying first, what those needs are. And so in the RAND model, there are basically these five stages of performance. There's missing it, which is the individual or the team is not performing and they frankly don't care that they're not performing. There's trying it, which is they're not performing, but they really are trying. They're engaged. Maybe this is classic for newbies. Then we have hitting it, which is the performance is acceptable. It's not outstanding, but it's good, right? And then we have over it, which is, as I described in the webinar this morning, it's hey, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. I'm still performing really at a high level, but maybe I'm losing my engagement for some reason, or I'm overwhelmed, I'm burning out, or I have something going on in my personal life. And then the last stage is crushing it, where they are performing at a really high level, very much engaged. And so, based on those five, what I work with my leaders is to say, okay, what are the roles that these individuals need? And this is based on, at this point, 75 years of research on this, beginning all the way back with the Ohio studies on it. And really, the roles are sometimes I need to be a commander, not a jerk, not a yeller, not a screamer, but I have to be high direction and low support for my misfits. My tridents, they need a coach. They need an individual who's going to give them guidance, but also a lot of support. For my hit it, the individual or team who's performing well, it's more of a counselor role. We're going to sit down and say, hey, is this good enough right now? Or do you have aspirations to go farther in this organization? And if so, how do we raise your performance to make you a strong candidate? For my over it, I need to be a cheerleader, right? High support, not a whole lot of direction because they're doing a good job, but this is where they want to see the humanity of their leader and be supportive. And then last but not least, for someone who is crushing it or for a team that is high performing, what should be the easiest role for modern leaders, but is very often difficult because it means letting go, is being a consultant and stepping back and saying, hey, to borrow from a shorter distance and multi-sport running, I'm going to pass the baton to you and you own this.
Oh, yeah, it's always hard to give up that stick,
Yeah,
it's
it
always
is.
and one of the things that a lot of people, whether they are a merit runner or not, everyone's heard of the wall, and you hit
Yes.
the wall and something happens in marathoning. But what is the wall in leadership? And you talk about that in your book, so give us a little precursor on.
Yeah, in the running world, the wall was simply when your body, I'm very much simplifying a complex chemical process, but it's when your body goes from burning sugar and those short burn fuels to burning fat, right? And in the elite runners, that wall may last for 10 seconds. In us middle of the packers or back of the packers, it could take minutes because it's miserable. And you know this, Barrett. It literally feels like you have run into a wall. And that's when most people quit. So, what I took from that metaphor is every single successful leader is going to hit walls in their career, right? And the great ones recognize how to get over that wall, go around that wall, find a door in that wall, pause and step back and contemplate, okay, what does this wall mean? Maybe take the advice of Marcus Aurelius and also Ryan Holiday in his modern books on Stoicism and recognize that that obstacle is the way, right? That the wall is not the barrier, the wall is the way, and it's there for a reason. And so I spend a lot of time, especially in my coaching with executives, finding out what their walls are and how we're going to get them through that.
Okay, so as you talk about the wall, I kind of think of literally hitting a brick wall, and that's kind of like a failure, right?
Yeah,
And so sometimes you win, sometimes you maybe don't win,
yeah.
and you talk about the importance of celebrating both of those things. Can you expand on that?
Sure. In the book, I talk a lot about, um, first of all, in today's pace, we don't even do a good job of celebrating our successes as well as we should. But, most of the time, if we have a big success, we're excited and we'll stop and we'll celebrate and enjoy that moment. I ask my leaders that I work with to not just focus on their successes, but recognize their failures and celebrate their failures. because those walls that we hit, those failures that we encounter, have valuable lessons for us, right? If we just treat them as failures. And in the book, I talk about some of my running failures. I talk about some of the leaders I've worked with and some of theirs failures. And I also provide a tool for individuals to work through those failures, right? And I use this a lot in my coaching work and provided it in the book so individuals can do it themselves. But, first step, recognizing, hey, own my emotion. I'm hurt. I'm frustrated. I'm angry that I failed at this because ignoring the emotion doesn't help. But then also saying, okay, why did I fail? Then we go from the emotional to the objective analysis of what went wrong here. And you know what? Sometimes in a marathon and sometimes in life as a leader, it's hard to identify, right? Especially if you're a believer like I am in systems, that sometimes we can't identify that single failure point, but we try to do that. And then process, and most importantly, and why we should celebrate it is, what am I going to do differently? Right? What did I
Yeah.
learn from this so that the next time I'll do things differently? In the marathoning world, one of the biggest mistakes rookies make is to go out too quickly, right?
Mm.
And they're destined to crash and burn. We call it banking time, right? Hey, I'm supposed to run a 10-minute pace and I'm running the first half marathon at 8.5. I can pretty much guarantee that second half marathon is going to be ugly because you're going to crash and burn. And the same thing with our leaders. If we don't pace ourselves and if we don't recognize and stick to the plan, we can crash and burn. Okay, it happens to all of us. What did we learn from it?
Yeah. So in lesson 24, you talk about not being so afraid to fail that you leave something on the course. So what's an example of leaving something on the course in a leadership capacity?
Yeah, I see this all the time, and this is where we get into the comfort level with risk, right? Being a successful leader means taking smart, intelligent risk. You cannot accomplish great things either on the marathon course or as a leader without taking those risks. But they're intelligent risk. And what I have found over the years, and I think all of us, whether you're familiar with DISC, Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, any of the kind of personality, the big five personality test, certain individuals are more comfortable with accepting risk than others. And so, what I work with my leaders on is to accept that, look, just like the marathoner who finished a race way too fresh, meaning they left something on the course,
Yeah.
as a leader, you need to recognize there is a risk of failure here. And
Mm.
that's okay as long as I try and limit that risk as much as possible, and recognize that sometimes being successful means I'm going to have to put everything on the line. Just a real world example one time, and I'll be as generic as possible, but I was working with a small kind of boutique pharmaceutical, and they were at a point where some of their tests were going pretty well, and some of the field studies were not going so well, but they were burning cash. And I was doing a strategic offsite with them, and it was really interesting because most of the executives understood that they needed to take a risk, and they needed to say, you know what, so far our studies are showing that maybe this is the drug we should focus on. And unfortunately, we couldn't convince some of the board members and the CEO to make that risk. And they didn't want to put the proverbial eggs in the basket. And
Yeah.
therefore, it took too long, and they eventually got bought out by a competitor because they were running out of cash. So that's just one example of sometimes you have to go for it, and it could mean in the marathoning world a DNF, a did not finish. In the
Yeah.
business world, it could mean a failure, but think about all the great business leaders who have failed in their lives and come back from it.
So having done 100 marathons, have you had any DNFs in that journey?
It's interesting. In the marathon community, I have been very fortunate that I have finished every marathon that I've started, but I've had a few ultras where I've realized pretty early on, you know what, this isn't my day.
Yeah.
And discretion is the better part of valor.
Yeah, yeah, definitely for sure.
Yeah.
Now as I work through the book, in one of your final lessons, you talk about the importance of recovery
Yeah.
in lesson 26, and you talk about the need for that, and you fashion 7 rests. types of rest. So could you maybe take us through that?
Yeah, and I think this one has become so important in today's workplace. Burnout is rampant, quiet quitting because people have just become disengaged. And a lot of it comes back to we have to allow recovery. This is beyond just the celebrating successes. This is recognizing that I can't expect myself, my team, my entire organization to just go full sprint, race after race
Yeah,
or project after project. And I draw in lesson 26 on the wonderful book that is called Spirit Rest by Dr. Sandra. And I want to make sure I misspoke earlier. And I'm going to go back to my book here. It's better to be accurate than to just speak off the top of my head.
sure.
Um, it is sacred rest, and I think I made the same mistake that I made earlier today. But it's Sacred Rest by Sandra Dalton Smith, MD. And it's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. But in it, the doctor talks about that we have different types of rest, that we have to find balance in today's society. So she talks about, of course, physical rest. But that physical rest actually could be active rest. It could be yoga. It could be all kinds of other rest, not just sitting around, but also mental rest. How do we give our minds a break, especially in today's hyper-connected world? Sensory rest, right? We don't have a lot of silence in our world anymore, and that's important. It's one of the things I love about running trails versus running in the city. Social
Oh yeah.
rest. Even the most extroverted among us needs some time away from people, right? And we just need to get out of that. And then emotional rest when we have to realize that I can't care about everything, right? I have to turn my emotions off, and not get wound up in this. I think social media has really created a problem with that because suddenly we're upset about everything. She also talks about creative rest and the importance of you don't have to be creative all the time, and I see this especially in one of my daughters who's now also a parent and she's got children, and it's just like, hey, it doesn't always have to be that Instagram moment, where everything is perfectly
Yeah.
pictured and we're all wearing the same clothes. And then probably the most important that I would say ultimately is spiritual rest, however you define it, right?
Mm.
But we need in today's modern society to regenerate our spirit and to have that spiritual connection to something that is deeper than us.
Yeah.
So again, the book is called Sacred Rest. I know we're talking about my book, but I highly recommend this in today's burnout, disengaged world.
Mhm. Yeah, great, great. Well, we have a couple more minutes left, and I want to make sure I extend an invitation to those who are in attendance to pose any question in the chat that you have for David or myself, and we'd be more than happy to answer that question for you while you have this captive audience. So, uh, so while you do that, I have a couple more questions for you, David. So you kind of prefaced this early on about for any non-runners not to be intimidated. That the book primarily focused uses marathon in the title, and you and I happen to be long-term runners. How do you make that bridge to folks who may be intimidated when you're talking about an endurance sport and you're talking and tying it to leadership? How do
Yeah.
you best make that
Yeah,
bridge?
absolutely. I even said in the introduction, I really tried to write this book for individuals who don't even like to drive 26 miles, let alone run 26 miles. So I keep coming back to, look, this is just a metaphor. And my definition of a marathon leader is just to get you to think in terms of the long run, right? And not just short, because, not to go down the rabbit hole of management versus leadership, but I write in the book that management is a sprint, right? It's a 90-day sprint for a public company. Marathon leadership is about seeing the vision, the long-term vision, right? It's about making that decision that in the short term is painful for you or your organization, but in the long run is going to be successful. So yeah, I even say in the introduction of the book, if you're a runner, you may pick up a couple tips from reading this, but that's not the focus of the book.
No, 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 that's good. That's good. Well, I definitely hope that we can get a chance to collaborate at the ILA Global Conference in Toronto later this year. we kind of kicked that idea around. And amongst us and some others that we talked to, we'd have close to 300 marathons to talk about and close to 100 years of work experience to
Yes.
share from a leadership capacity. So I really appreciate you putting this work out here. I'm enjoying reading it myself and taking some tips away from it, even the running and the leadership.
Yeah.
Again, I think we all are leaders, whether we are
Yes.
in a work environment, home environment, relationships with your family, with your friends. We all have a leadership capacity, and I think you all can gain some and glean some insights from David's work. So I definitely appreciate you sharing it with us all today and having the opportunity to really get to meet you and get to know you and to moderate this session. It's been a pleasure for me to do so.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And for those of you who called in this evening, I appreciate you taking some time from, giving me some of your valuable time. Don't hesitate to follow up with me on LinkedIn or using my web to reach out to me because I'm always happy to do follow up if you have any questions that come to you or if you're reading the book and it generates a question, would love to stay in touch. So I appreciate all your insight, Barrett. And just to let other people know if you're still on there. Barrett is calling in from Berlin too, so he's up really late to be the moderator for this. So I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure. And
Yeah,
definitely look David up on LinkedIn and connect with him there as well, and can gain some more insights from him in the professional capacity. So thank you all for joining. Have a great evening and good night for some of us. And
yeah.
looking forward to meeting you soon, David.
All right. Me too, Barrett. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.